here. Good morning. Music's too low. Killed it. Okay, I'll give people a couple of minutes because I said 10. Oh, it is 10 now. Good morning, Mr. Rajput. And who else is here? Let's see. Alessandro, good morning. Okay. All right, so a little bit different than usual. We're going the mod stream for kind of a review, or an overview, I shouldn't say review. Basically every Zeiss lens I could grab. I took a couple weekends off. I was finally able to get a vacation in, so I unplugged for a little bit. Or at least from work. But yeah, I'm back now, and I thought, over that course of time, I had my other staff helping out with stuff. There's a ton of questions about different Zeiss things and this and that, and what lens is this and what lens is that. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to just sort of look at all of the Zeiss offerings, new and old, and kind of just discuss it, answer your guys' questions. Oh, in fact, I had posted about it. So let me find those questions. I think the way I'm going to do this is sort of in release order. So I'll start with like the oldest Zeiss that I have here, and then just work my way up to the newest. Obviously, I don't have everything in-house, but I grabbed everything I could. Zeiss was kind enough to loan some of the more difficult to find stuff, like the new Supreme Radiance. Those I don't have those in-house because they're kind of a specialty. So thank you for that, Zeiss. Let's see, where did that question go? I lost the question. Oh, here it is. Okay, so there's a handful of good questions that I'll get to as I get through those lenses. Things from Copenhagen, nice. But I will get through them as I go through their age, basically. And I'll touch on zooms, but for the most part, we're focusing on primes. Okay, so let's get that started. Like I said, age order. So I think I'm gonna start with a good old super speed, if I can find it. Oh, here we go. I think everybody here knows super speeds, knows of them at the very least. They're kind of the gold standard as far as Zeiss cinema lenses go. So there we go. This one's in an okay shape. I've certainly seen worse. So the super speeds, and even here, I'm not going to go through every version of them. Actually, there's a blog post if you want to sort of get my take on the history of super speeds and the different names and versions. But in summary, the high-speed primes from Zeiss started with what we call B speeds, really. They were made for a B mount camera, and then they updated them for a PL mount, and then they became what everybody knows as the super speeds. The tricky part there that has become a little more common knowledge in the past 5 to 10 years is that Zeiss never called them super speeds. That was not a product name that Zeiss assigned to them. So that was a user-given name. The industry, the users sort of assigned that nomenclature. So when we say Mark 1, 2, and 3, it's all kind of variable because Zeiss never had firm versions for them. It's all user assigned, like I said. So what one person calls Mark 1, 2, and 3 may be a little different than what another person considers Mark 1, 2, and 3. I have my opinion, others have their opinion. It doesn't really matter. The only time it matters is when people are buying and selling, and maybe they have a disconnect on what one person thinks a Mark 1 is, or 2, 3, and then you have different expectations. So go to the CineLens.com, just search for Zeiss Super Speed name or something like that. I forget what it was. And that'll go through sort of all the identifiers in the scales and what to look for. The Mark 2s and 3s are the exact same glass. The Mark 1s from the B speeds did have differences, so there's a little disconnect there. So this particular model is a Mark 3. Very easy to tell because the marks are upright. When it's on the camera in the operator position, they are upright. Mark 1s and 2s, no matter which camp you fall in as far as the different features, have the numbers facing, the user, the back of the camera. So they'd be upright when you're looking at it this way. So, yeah. There's other minor, very, very minor differences. This rear housing on the Mark III, most of them are brass. Some of them were aluminum and anodized, and then others were stainless steel and painted. I don't know why Zeiss made those changes. Doesn't really matter. They're all the same functionality. So this was the gold standard of high-speed primes for a long time, and a lot of people say still is. It's really hard. You pretty much won't find a Cine lens at T1.3 this small and light. So I absolutely love super speeds. I've serviced maybe not thousands, but many super speeds. I love to work on them. They're very straightforward. They're very serviceable. These things will last an entire lifetime, an entire career or more, if you take care of them well. So there you go. That's our first one for the day. Super speeds. It's also worth noting that all of those lenses I mentioned, the B speeds, the super speeds, the standard speeds, anything up until the Zeiss CP.2 was manufactured by Zeiss, but for ARRI. So technically, this is an ARRI Zeiss 18mm T1.3. Okay. Hey Brian, welcome aboard. Long time no see. I think the last time I saw you was NAB, like 2 years ago. Actually, you know what? I'll leave them lined up here. If we can get, and we're gonna run out of space really fast. Actually, it's a bad idea. All right. So after that. The super speeds ranged from the 80s into the 90s. After that is probably what a lot of you guys are familiar with, would be something like the Zeiss Contax primes. This one has been modded already. As the added focus gear, it has a declicked aperture, has a Litax EF mount, standard front ring. But the Zeiss Contax were a photography cine gear. Did I see you at cine gear? Probably. They're a photo lens. They were very popular for the Zeiss Contax system, or for the Contax camera system. They're fantastic lenses. There's a lot of misinformation or loose information out there. The optics between this lens and this lens are not the same. There's a lot of people that say these are sort of mini super speeds. That is not accurate. The only similarity would be that you know, you have something like, this is a 3514 Distagon, and the Zeiss Super Speed was also a Distagon. But I want to drive this home because I've been preaching this for 10 years. Distagon to Zeiss is kind of like sedan is to Honda. It's a type of car or a type of lens, a type of design. It does not, it doesn't signify a specific optical design. Distagon is really referring to the angle of view that the lens produces. Kind of like with Leica, you have Summilux and Summicron, which refers to the speed of the lens, f1.4 or f2. So the term Distagon has been used by Zeiss for decades. It does not mean that it's the same optical design at all. So everybody loves these lenses. We all know that. They're fantastic. They're super light, they're super small. It's an f1.4, which means it's probably about a t1.5, give or take a stop, or a tenth of a stop. These are fantastic. These are great if you're making that jump from, say, a Canon L series up to something a little more cinematic, more manual, more controllable. The downsides to the Contax would be what we call the non-constant volume. So you see when you rotate the focus, the whole lens extends back and forth, whereas something like super speed, the scale itself might move a little bit back and forth, you know, very little bit. You can see, look at the distance from this witness mark to the scale. At infinity, it's a decent amount, and then when you go to close focus, it almost covers that little triangle. But the actual body does not change. So in these, it does on most of them, not all of them. Renting a set of Supreme primes for an upcoming shoot. Thanks for the stream. No problem. Enjoy those Supreme primes. We'll get there. We're going through the decades here. You talk about the CA and the super speeds. It's there. It's prominent. It's part of what gives them their look. Love it or hate it, it's that vintage style. I think it's very polarizing because a lot of people are looking for a vintage look. They're looking for vintage lenses. And then they get a set of vintage lenses like super speeds. And you have things like chromatic aberration and spherical aberration and ghosting and all these things. And they try to get rid of it. They try to mitigate it. But that's what makes it a vintage lens. So it's definitely there. You just have to work with it. Watching live streams. Thank you, Thomas. So, yeah. Zeiss Contax. They made them for probably about 20 years-ish. There's tons of them out there. Sadly, the prices have skyrocketed on these. They're becoming more and more difficult to find at decent prices. And you're sort of seeing them come out of the woodwork. You're seeing what I would consider subpar models going for really high prices. So be very careful when you're buying something like a Zeiss Contax Prime. It's a little easier to do with super speeds because, well, the price comparison is not there. A set of super speeds can go for anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000, but that usually comes with a really thorough check. It's hard to sell a subpar set of super speeds, but people are so eager to get Contax primes that you can pick them up on eBay and you don't really know what you're getting. So just be careful with Contax primes. It's also worth noting, so these were, the super speeds were PL mount. They were never made in any other mount aside from the early versions being B mount. The Contax primes came with a Contax Yoshika mount, which can easily be converted to EF. So that's, I'd say, probably 99% of the Contax primes that we see come through either have or receive an EF conversion. Johnny, good morning, Johnny. Love the stream. 2 of my favorite lenses already. Oh, we're just getting started, so hang on there. All right. So I'm trying to remember. They had a pretty big gap between those two. Okay, I know where we're going now. After those would have been these guys. I gotta space my caps too. So we had that. Okay, so there was a pretty big gap between the Contax Yashica and then the next iteration, which would be the Zeiss ZF and ZE. Sorry, I thought that ringer was off. These were really so after the CY lenses, the most popular camera systems were obviously Nikon and Canon. Alessandro, any possibility to have Contax converted to PL? Yes and no. Contax lenses can be rehoused to PL, and they cannot be converted to PL. It's just not going to happen. It's just not possible. Let me fix this here. Yeah, rehousing is always an option, but converting them is just not a reasonable solution. It can't be done. I mean, it could possibly be done, but it'd be really wonky. You wouldn't be able to reach your scales. It's not a good idea. So, ZF and ZE. The F in ZF stood for Nikon F mount, and the E in ZE stood for Canon EF or EOS mount. So when Nikon and Canon had their sort of modern, or their newer SLR mounts, this is what Zeiss came up with. Technically, this is a ZF.2, and the ZE never really changed. So the ZF was a fully manual Nikon F mount lens. The ZF.2 had a couple modifications. One was this aperture lock, and it had this. It had the electronics that let it communicate the metadata. That was the only difference. The glass did not change. So between the ZF2 and ZE, the optics are all the same. So the 35-1.4 is the same between all three versions. The 50-1.4, it's all the same. That did not change. The only thing that changed was the way the lens mounted to the camera and the communication back and forth. The ZE models do not have an aperture ring. They cannot have an aperture ring. It's all electronic. The only thing that controls the aperture in this lens is a tiny little motor that is actuated by whatever the camera tells it to do. So because of that, most people prefer the ZF2 because you have a fully manual aperture ring. So quick history on the ZF2s as far as Duclos lenses goes. Once Zeiss released a decent set of these, like a 35, 50, 85, they had a 21 that was a little bit slower. We started looking into, this was right around the time we did our 11-16 conversion, and we were trying to figure out what's next. And we started tearing these apart and started looking into, hey, maybe we could rehouse these as a cinema lens, a proper cinema lens, give them a 95 or a 114 front and make them constant volume and fully geared and a PL mount, all this stuff. And at the time we thought, it's kind of expensive, and the red one was barely coming out at the time. It wasn't a booming industry. So instead we opted for what we called our CINE-MOD, what we coined as the CINE-MOD, which was the declicking, the focus gear, and the standardized front ring. So instead of rehousing the whole lens, we just kind of modified it superficially. And that did really, really well for a while. It was around the time of the 5D, and the red one was just becoming popular, and things were sort of picking up. Then around the time the Epic came out, we really started looking at it again, thinking, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe we should do a rehousing. So we started reaching out to our friends at Zeiss, and I'm not sure I don't think I'm breaking any NDAs or anything like that, but if I am, it's long gone. So, or it's history. So they basically, once we started reaching out to Zeiss, they kind of pulled us aside and said, maybe you hold off on your rehousing project. And they showed us that they were developing the compact primes, the original compact primes, which was essentially this glass. Well, not this one. This is the 135. This came much later. But their current line of ZF2 and ZE primes put into a cinema housing. So when the original compact... Oh, do I even have one of those? I don't. So that's the tricky part. The compact primes, the original CPs, had a very short lifespan. They're kind of hard to find. They were limited in focal lengths. They were faster than the CP2s, but they had a fixed PL mount. So those had a nice quick lifespan. And then they switched to the CP.2s or CP2s. And the benefit of that was they gave them an interchangeable mount, which at the time was really important. I think that's really what put the Zeiss compact primes on the map. So I'm going to skip over the original compact prime because I just don't have, I rarely see them. They're really hard to find. Oh, and then one other difference, the 35, 50, and 85 on the original compact primes were T15, whereas on the CP2s, they were all T2.1 with the exception of the 18 and the 21. So here, I'll set these up here. ZF2, ZE. So then we switch to the CP2. This is an 18. So the glass in this lens is the same as the ZF2 and the ZE. So this would be an 18mm f 3.5. So it becomes a T 3.6. So other than the 18 and the 21, they were all T2.1 and the 15, I think. So they limited the aperture on the 50 and the 85, and then they released the CP2 super speeds. So this is, which one is this? This is the 35. So this one technically was a different lens design. This one was based on the 35 f1.4. So the super speeds, there were only 3. There were, and this was the first time that Zeiss actually used the word super speed on a product. So the 35, 50, and 85 were re-released as CP2 super speed. The only way to tell the difference is the speed of the lens, T15, the word super speed right there, and the silver ring on the aperture here. Other than that, they're the exact same lens. They just open wider in the case of the 50 and the 85. The 35 regular CP2 was based on the 35 f2 ZF, which was a native T2.1 instead of the super speed, which was based on the 35 1.4, hence T1.5. So this, I think, is really what put Zeiss on the map as far as modern cine lenses go. And if I'm not mistaken, oh, hold on. I wish the ZEs didn't have the motor. Yeah. Oh, one fact I skipped over on the ZF2 and ZE. The ZF2 has a backwards focus. They had to conform to Nikon's standard, which was an opposite focus rotation than Canon. So, minor detail. Coatings difference in the older lenses versus ZF series. Did the coatings change dramatically over the years? If so, what did those changes do? I assume you're referring to like the ZF2 going back to the Contax, in which case I wouldn't say that they changed dramatically, but they did improve, obviously. They all use T-Star coating, but T-Star is just the name that Zeiss applies to any coating that they put on their lenses. So it's not a specific formula. As far as I know, I've had a lot of conversations with Benjamin from Zeiss, Benjamin Volkler, about the specifics to the coatings, and they don't really use the exact same formula for every lens. So it does vary a little bit, even within the same family. So going from something like the mid-80s up until the 2000s, yeah, the coating's gonna be different. Definitely. But it's not gonna be... Let's put it this way. If you were somehow able to put this Contax lens through all the same coating processes of the ZF2, it wouldn't change it significantly, as far as I can tell. Has the super speeds and the ZE the same quality? No, they are completely different quality, completely different optical designs. They have almost nothing in common. So I was gonna say, and I'm not entirely certain on this, but I believe that the CP2, or the compact primes and the CP2s, were the first Cine lens, even though they were based on a photo lens, but the first lens that Zeiss released for Cine that was not an airy product. Oh, I skipped over a bunch of stuff. I'm sorry. Here, let's back up here. So we had the super speeds, and then let's see, in the caps here, in the 90s, we had the ultra primes, which are, I mean, obviously it says Zeiss right on it. Everybody calls them Zeiss ultra primes. Nobody calls them airy ultra primes, except for airy, because airy wants their credit. So all of the Cine lenses, the B speeds, the super speeds, the standard speeds, the ultra primes, the master primes, those were all cinema lenses that Zeiss built for airy. So airy would say, hey, we need Cine lenses. Zeiss, can you build these lenses to this, these specs? We want this focal length, we want this speed. And Zeiss would say, sure, here's the designs, here's this and that. They were made for airy by Zeiss. So technically, this is an airy product made by Zeiss. So what my point was going to these CP2s was this was the first time that Zeiss actually made their own cinema lens without without being contracted by airy to make something for cinema. So backing up a little bit to the ultra primes, this was their sort of answer to the super speeds. Once they weren't able to use certain materials in the lenses and they kind of struggled to get them to be as fast as they wanted, they kind of had to sacrifice something. So that's why they're T1.9 instead of T1.3 like the super speeds were. This was sort of the last cinema lens that was, I guess we'll say, more basic in a way. After the ultra primes, we jumped to the master primes, which I oddly don't have today. Normally I'd go bug service department and grab one, but we literally don't have a master prime in-house right now, which is surprising. So this was sort of the gold standard after the super speeds. Every rental house had ultra primes. It was just what you had. It was the set of primes. If you didn't have ultra primes, you had S4s. So yeah, fantastic. These, in my opinion, they still are a great lens for Super 35. The downside to ultra primes, the only downside I can think of, is they're a little bit slow. So it's a T1.9, which is practically a T2, and they breathe. They breathe a significant amount. I mean, I shouldn't say significant. They breathe a not insignificant amount. So it really irks me these days when people complain about breathing on something like a CP2 or a Sigma or Tokina or anything like that, because all of these lenses have less breathing than something like an ultra prime, and yet nobody ever complained about focus breathing on an ultra prime. So I get it. In a modern Cine lens, I expect it to not have focus breathing, but at the same time, it's just kind of, we've been spoiled with things like master primes and really sophisticated lenses. But I've never heard of a DP say, no, I don't want ultra primes because they breathe too much. It was just not a thing. So we'll put that in order there. We'll leave an honorable space for master primes. I don't have one here. Hello from France, hello from Greece, nice. What about focus breathing with Milvis? It's definitely there, there's no question about it. Milvis we're getting to, actually that's probably almost, yeah, we're getting there, almost. So CP2, CP2 Super Speed. I mixed that up. That's a CP2. That's a Super Speed. After those, what came after that? I think after that would have been the Otus, I believe. This was a fun. I should have grabbed the 55, not the 85. The Otus was a really fun product. Oh, this one has the enhanced focus scale. Haha. So, history with the Otus is really fun because it was... I'll answer this question first. What's the deal with Zeiss lenses with the triangular aperture? Can you find it in super speeds? No, it won't be in super speeds. The triangular aperture was only in the T2.1s. I'm sorry. The B speeds. Oh, no, there was a whole bunch of questions. Hold on, slow down. I also read that it could reduce focus shift because of the triangular shape. Any truth in that? I don't know. I think that's probably a better question for a PhD. Just thinking about that layout in an optical path, I can't imagine how a triangular aperture would reduce focus shift, but I might be wrong. Yeah, I would definitely ask a PhD that question. That's something... When I say a PhD, I mean an actual optical engineer, not an armchair or a technician like me. There's a big divide between a lens technician and an optical engineer. Jumping back a bit to when you were talking about the Contax primes, it's an f1.4, but you said it's about a t1.5. How do you make that calculation, or you just know it's t-stop testing? That's just my experience in actually t-stopping lenses on a bench. In a relatively modern lens, you're going to lose, in most cases, a f1.4 would be about a t1.5. In older lenses that have inferior coatings, non-multi coatings, it would be less. So an f1.4 would be something like a t1.8 maybe, just ballparking there. But with modern coatings, it's pretty modern coatings and not super sophisticated designs. So basically on something like the Contax lenses, none of them are super sophisticated as far as the actual layout goes, the number of elements. On something like a Zeiss Otus that has a large number of elements and surfaces for light to be reduced, then it might be a little bit more significant. So like this is an f1.4. If I t-stopped this Otus, it might be like a t1.6 or 1.7 maybe, because there's so many pieces of glass or so many surfaces. Is it true that the 29mm Supreme rehoused 28 Otus? No, that is not true. Definitely not true. Is lens breathing a byproduct of the rear elements being scaled down for Super 35, but the front elements being larger for Photo 35? No. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. The rear element being scaled down. Are you referring to the Ultra Prime? Because no, the focus breathing is going to be present in any lens that doesn't compensate for it in the optical design. So something like a Master Prime, they took the focus breathing into consideration when they designed it and compensated for it. Is there any 60, 50, or 35 photo lens with limited focus breathing? Leica 60 macro. No, the Leica is going to breathe also. Pretty much none of the photo lenses. Canon FD, Nikon AIS, Zeiss Contax, Leica R, they're all going to breathe. It's just the nature of a lens like that. It was not a consideration for photography lenses design. Love the stream. Interested in investing in an Otus set. Why don't I see the option to get the iris ring gear and the focus engraving marks on your website? It's just like a special request thing. We definitely do that for people that want it. I think we don't put it on our website because it has to come. It used to come with the caveat back when people were using these on things like a 5D. The camera body, they had that ledge for the reflex system that would come up and over, and on some cameras the gear would hit the camera body. These days that's not really a concern because everyone's using mirrorless. So I think that's just a matter of history. We always had to warn people, and if we didn't warn them 5 times over and make sure they understood, and then we shipped them the lens and it hit their camera body, they'd be upset. The focus scale is also sort of a special request thing. Also, just because it's kind of expensive relative to the lens, so we just don't want people saying Duclos charges $300 for a gear, which isn't true, but without explaining it very clearly, it doesn't make sense to people. So I'll go over these mods in a minute, but do you believe the Contax Zeiss 645 lenses could be converted to PL mount like the Mamiya 645? I've never looked into that. I believe so, but I also think that most of the Zeiss 645 lenses have a shutter built in. I might be wrong about that, which makes them less than ideal for cinematography because you have the shutter in the lens. But I've never tried. I know that some of the Zeiss 645 lenses were used in IMAX lenses or iWorks lenses for large format cinematography, but not PL mount. They had very specific mounts that they used. Now for focus stacking. Focus breathing is important for photography. Focus breathing isn't important for focus stacking, really, because, maybe it depends on the software you're using. So I use focus stacking for most of the product photos on our website. And the software that I use automatically crops, zooms and crops to match each frame, regardless of the focus breathing. Are there any Zeiss photography lenses that can be CINE-MODed with PL mounts? Again, not modded, but they can be rehoused. So Zero Optic does a fantastic rehousing for some Zeiss. Actually, do they do the Contax? I don't remember. GL Optics has their newer housings. GL Optics is tricky. They used to be pretty low on the totem pole as far as the quality of the housings go, but they've really stepped it up. So I know that GL does Contax primes, and their newer housings are really nice. Or at least much better than they used to be. No, Contax 645 is a mess for f-stop electronic. Oh, well, there you go. Then, oh, good. Okay, I'll get back to those questions in a minute. So the really interesting part, and Phil chimed in, Phil knows all about this history with the Otus. They started with the 55mm. This is the 85mm, which came next. When Zeiss released their 55mm, it was a like $3,500 or something. Actually, what is the price on that? I'll just look at the ZE. Oh, okay, $4,000. So Zeiss comes out and releases a $4,000 55mm, which is at the time insane. You could get a Canon L series for half of that, whatever. And it was basically a massive flex for Zeiss. Zeiss wanted to say, this is what we can do if price isn't an option or isn't a consideration. We can engineer this fantastic lens. Optically, it will be very, very, very good. It'll be expensive, but here's what we are capable of. So it was more or less a showpiece, more or less a demonstration of what they're capable of. And from what I've been told, that they never expected to profit on the Otus. It was going to be a marketing ploy. And then everybody bought Otus. photographers, cinematographers, everybody in between. Everybody wanted that extreme quality from a Zeiss Otus. And they were just blown away. So then they released the 85, and then the 28, and now the 100. And the only real criteria that they have for the Zeiss Otus is it has to be stunning image quality, and it has to be f1.4, which is why you haven't really seen like an 18mm Otus, because that would just be insanely difficult. However, they did, going back to the classics, the ZF2 and ZE, they did come out with the 15 and the 135, which in my opinion could easily be part of the Otus family. The 15, again, they're not going to consider it an Otus because it's not an f1.4, and the 135 is a f2, I think. But they could easily go toe-to-toe with the other Otus lenses. They just couldn't call them that because of the speed. So Otus really does sort of stand for the ultimate in image quality. They definitely earned the name Mini Master Primes. Is the Otus the highest quality lens on the market? For sheer optical quality, it's close. It's very close. I think the Airy Signature Primes are a strong contender. Those are probably some of the highest quality lenses, image quality lenses I've ever seen. It's kind of hard to compare them because one is the cost of a small boat and the other is $5,000. Granted, this is still very expensive for some people, but when you're talking about relative prices, yeah. But pound for pound, this is definitely the highest image quality you can get. Are Otus better than Master Primes? I would say it depends on what you're using it for. It's hard to say definitively, but there's a couple key things to consider. This is a quarter the price of a Master Prime. It is half the size and weight. It is full frame and not Super 35. So when you take those facts into consideration, some could argue that it is better than a Master Prime. But if I'm shooting a feature film and I've got a crew of 200 people, and every second counts, and I need precise focus, and I need accurate t-stops and interchangeability between focal lengths, then I would say the Master Prime is still going to be a better lens. So it completely depends on what you're shooting and how you're shooting it. But there is no arguing that an Otus is a beast of a lens. Do they plan to release more Otus focal lengths? I don't know. I know that they have had focal lengths that they've been sort of tinkering with and, playing with. I'm sure that COVID affected whatever release plans they had, if any. But I would love to see more Otus lenses. I've been begging for a 35 Otus for 5 years now, something like that. So we'll see. We'll see. Or those other questions. Okay, so you're asking about Loxia. I will get to those in a minute. For 4K, 50mm Contax versus Milvis, a huge difference. Yes, a Milvis 50-1.4 will definitely be higher image quality than a Contax 1.4. Again, however, if you're looking for vintage character and more, beauty, more cinematic feel, then that Contax is going to provide that, whereas the Milvis is going to be clean and sharp and accurate. So it depends on what you're doing. I would not say that one is better than the other. I'd say choose the right horse for the right course. Biggest difference between Otus versus Milvis? That's a good question. That's a tough one. There is not a huge difference. So we'll get to that. So CP.2, then they came out with the Otus, and then they came out with the Milvis. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to keep track of all these caps here. So the Milvis were the ZF and ZF2s were fantastic lens. We modded hundreds, if not thousands of those. And I actually attribute Zeiss in great deal to the success of the sales portion of Duclos lenses. So they were officially the first brand that we became an official dealer for. We started buying their Zeiss ZF2s and ZEs and modifying them, and that was sort of the beginning of our sales division. And I have to give a super special shout out to Richard Schluning. If any of you guys here deal with Zeiss, then you know Richard Schluning. He was a former Hasselblad rep, became basically the top of Zeiss America. And without his support, I can tell you right now, we would not be a Cine lens dealer for any other brands. So there is a special place in my heart for Zeiss and for Richard himself. He was fantastic. So anyways, replacing the ZF and the ZF2s, there were definitely some dogs in that set of lenses. You had the 18 3.5, which was too slow, too poor image quality. The 50-1.4 was really flary, really soft, lots of chromatic aberration. The 85-1.4 had a ton of chromatic aberration. Just, they weren't the best, especially after Zeiss came out with the Otus. There was a huge gap in the image quality depending on the focal length. And that brings me to another, actually I'll leave this like that so you guys can see it. It brings me to another quick point. People always ask, Zeiss Classic versus Leica R, or ZF2 versus Milvis. The range in image quality within the ZF2 and ZE product lines is so all over the place. If you averaged it out, it'd be, merely okay. But you have something like I said, the ZF 135, which is fantastic image quality. And then you have something like the 50-1.4 ZF, which is, for the most part, a dog. So to say that the ZF is good or bad compared to anything is very misleading, because it's such a huge range in quality. So that's, for the most part, why Zeiss came out with the Milvis. They needed something new that really represented what Zeiss was capable of. The ZF2 and the ZE they inherited their optical design from the Contax lenses, which at that point were decades old in some of the focal lengths. So that it needed a refresh. It needed to be modernized. And that's where the Milvis came from. Milvis for video, better to go with ZF2 and have the mount conversion, or for ZE? Yes, definitely, because you have the manual aperture. So in the case of the Milvis, and again, if you want more info, go to thecinelens.com, because there's a whole explanation of the differences and which ones are the same, which ones are new. It's a little outdated now because they've added more focal lengths. But the Milvis took the best of the ZE and ZF2 and ran with it into the Milvis line, and then whatever wasn't good enough, they refreshed and made it good. So let's see, the 35 f2, the 50 macro, the 100 macro, the 21, the 15, and the 135 sort of transplanted that optical design from the ZF2 into the Milvis. So it did not change. And that's fine, because those were fantastic lenses to begin with. Everything else, the 18, the 35, the 50, the new 25, the 85, those were completely redesigned, and they give the Otus a run for their money. Those are fantastic. All of the Milvis lenses are solid lenses. There is no dog anymore. Any issues they had optically with the ZF2 and ZE, they basically just fixed it and said, here's the Milvis, this is your new standard. Do the modern Zeiss lenses offer a swirl effect bokeh like the vintage ones? No, they really don't. That was considered a design flaw, and they worked really hard to get rid of that. Do you consider Contax Zeiss similar to other Zeiss lineups? That's a vague question. I don't understand. Contax would be very similar to Leica R and Nikon AIS, if that's kind of what you're asking. But even then, you're going to have pretty significant differences focal length to focal length. So the Milvis were Zeiss's answer to updating the ZF2 and the ZE. They still stuck with the same nomenclature. So there's a Milvis ZF2, which is F-mount. It has a full manual aperture. They did introduce their own declick functionality. So there's all the Milvis lenses come with a little key, and you stick it in the mount, and you turn it, and it turns off the clicks. And I applaud Zeiss for doing that, because they saw what we were doing with the CINE-MODs, and they thought, hey, we can offer that, and it'll appeal to cinematographers as well. And yes, that's true, but if you don't get it properly declicked, it's loose, it's dry, there's very little lubrication, it doesn't feel great, but it works. So if you just want to buy the lens and declick it with that little key, no problem. It achieves that functionality. It is, in fact, clickless. It just doesn't feel good. So, all the focuses have a nice, decent rotation. Not a huge fan of how they did the actual focus ring. So, for example, what is this? This is the 25. The focus ring itself is from the scale right here all the way to the front of this tapered ring. So the entire thing, it's kind of hard to see because there's nothing here. If I put this tape on here, now you can see when I turn the focus, the entire barrel almost rotates, which is just a little weird. It's kind of awkward. But I get it. For photography, it's nice to just be able to grab the whole thing and it rotates. Makes sense. I mean, are they seen as genuine Zeiss designs or Contax using the Zeiss? No. Zeiss... So it's similar to the Arri situation where they basically OEM a lens. Zeiss designed them. Zeiss made them... They did farm out the actual manufacturing to other factories. They weren't made in Germany necessarily, or in Oberkaken. But I still consider them a Zeiss lens. I don't really care which factory it came from. So there's the Milvis. I think I kind of skipped over the Batis and Loxia because that did come after the Otus, for the Milvis, but around the same time. So I'll do those two, the caps off here. So the Loxia and the Batis were, I think they came out around the same time as each other. And these were Zeiss's answer to modernizing their photo lenses. So the ZF2, the ZE, the Otus ZF2 and Otus ZE, and the Milvis ZF2 and ZE were SLR lenses. They were designed with a longer flange back because they were meant for cameras with a reflex system. So when Sony started making the A7 series or any of their mirrorless systems, that blew up. And obviously Zeiss has a really good relationship with Sony. They make a lot of lenses for Sony. They put their name in their cell phone camera lenses. So Zeiss saw that opportunity and basically came out with these two options. And this is where a lot of the questions I had recently come from, because on paper they sound similar, but they're very, very different. On paper, they're both a full frame mirrorless lens, but they're completely different in practical applications. So I'll jump into both of these here. Hold on, let me scroll up here. I'm missing some of this chat. Looking to invest in a set of high-speed primes. Can you rank image quality between Canon CNE, the Sigma Cine primes, and the Milvis high-speed prime? As far as image quality goes, ooh, that's tough. It's definitely it's gonna be a tighter competition between the Milvis and the Sigma, whereas the CNE are gonna fall a little behind both of those. If you're looking for more cinematic features in the build of the lens, I would definitely say go with Sigma. If you're looking to save a couple bucks and you want lighter, smaller, you know, something you want to put on a gimbal, the Milvis are fantastic lenses optically. I really, if you showed me the image quality, like the projection tests between a Sigma Cine and a Milvis, I would struggle to tell the difference between most of the normal focal lengths. How good are the Loxia versus the Milvis? Loxia are great, but I'm going to get into that in a minute because there are some really key differences. Between ZF, ZF2, and Milvis, which ones look closer to the vintage ones? Also flares more. The Milvis will not look similar to the vintage ones because Zeiss really designed out most of the flaws. And when you say vintage, really what you're talking about is having design flaws. So the ZF and ZF2 would be similar to the Contax primes. None of them are really going to be too similar to the super speeds, but if I had to pick one, I would definitely say the ZF and ZF2 are closer to super speeds than the Milvis. But even then, they're not going to match. You probably wouldn't want to intercut super speeds and ZF2s. Did the Milvis come out before the Otus, or that way around? I thought Milvis came out after. Yes, Milvis came out after the Otus, for sure. The Otus came out right in the middle of Zeiss adding more focal lengths to the classic ZF2s. And they never called them classic until they came out with the Milvis because they had to sort of give it a name. They changed their branding so that every lens was a Zeiss, being the manufacturer, whatever the product line was, and then the mount. So you had the Zeiss Otus ZF2, Zeiss Milvus ZF2. They couldn't have just Zeiss ZF2, so they call it the Zeiss Classic ZF2. Alright, so moving on to the Batis and the Loxia. The Batis were the sort of fully electronic, super light, super nimble solution that Zeiss came out with. These lenses are completely fly-by-wire. There is no mechanical linkage between this focus and the actual optics. What happens when you draws power through the mount, when you put this lens on the camera, it draws power and says, okay, I'm active. The little LED screen lights up. And when you turn this ring, the lens recognizes that. It says, oh, you turned the ring, whatever the encoder reads, 2 points or 10 points or whatever. Quick, motor, move the optics this much. And it does that. So personally, I cannot stand this type of focus. That's just how I use lenses. It's my personal style. There's no hard stop. It just keeps spinning and spinning. It's definitely useful if you're just leaving it on autofocus because nothing actually, there's less to break down. All the motor has to do is move the optics back and forth. It's not turning this whole ring. So for like drone stuff or gimbal work, or even something like this streaming setup right now, like this top-down camera, I think it's still on autofocus, is it? Yeah, it is. That would be a great solution because it doesn't have to move a whole lot. So these are really, really useful for that type of scenario. Super lightweight, super nimble, but still looking for high image quality. You don't want to use a tiny kit lens or something like that. So these definitely have a place. They can be modified with a gear, but again, even with that gear, it's just, if you have a follow focus or even a motor driving the gear, it's just a motor telling another motor what to do, or the follow focus telling this ring to tell the motor in the lens what to do. It's not a direct connection. So it's what we call fly-by-wire. So yeah, they're fun. They definitely serve a purpose. And then the Loxia were sort of the throwback option. The Loxia are not the same optics whatsoever, but this is a fully manual, old school, kind of almost almost an homage to vintage photography, but with nice high image quality. These are super tiny, super compact, and they kind of suffer as a result. You get the slower speeds. So like this is a 35 f2. You're not going to see high-speed Loxia lenses, sadly. But they're super tiny. These are reminiscent of Leica M lenses as far as the design goes, not the optics, obviously. So again, super shallow flange. They can't be converted to anything else. We actually, there was a small side project I kind of got in trouble for because I leaked some of it, where we were gonna offer the Loxia in Fuji X mount. So a little bit more backstory there. Richard Schluning and I are both pretty big Fuji fans. We love shooting on Fujifilm. And Zeiss had their Tuit line, which was, again, sort of a mix between these two. They were small. They were small, manual, super compact, but they were for APS-C cameras. So like an A6000 or a Fuji XT, whatever the model was at the time. They were for the APS-C cameras, whereas these are both full frame. And the Tuit lenses were available in E mount and X mount. So Richard and I both wished that Zeiss would make these in Fuji mount, and they just never did, which was kind of a bummer, but I get it. They would be full frame lenses, and at the time, and still, there was no full frame Fuji camera, so it would have been kind of confusing from a consumer standpoint, because these are definitely consumer lenses. To explain to people, well, yes, it's a full frame lens, but you can use it on your APS-C sensor. Anyway, it just never sort of came to fruition. But I still have somewhere here an X mount Loxia, which I love tinkering with. That was a fun design. That design, that might have been Alex. Yeah, that was Alex. When Alex worked for us, he designed that mount conversion. So that was a fun little project. Oh, and it also would have been too expensive. Nobody would want to pay more for an X mount version on top of the existing price. So it just never happened. Anyway, the Loxia are fully manual, so they can have a focus gear, and it is directly connected to the focus system. You can see it telescoping in and out. They can have a front ring, they can have an iris gear if you really wanted to, but it kind of covers up the markings there because it's so small. They also have that declick feature. This little slot right here, you just stick a key and turn, and it disables. I think you could probably hear it. In fact, it's very similar. This is the wrong screwdriver, but oh well. There you go. No more clicks. And this one's lubricated a little better than the Milvis, but well. So it's as simple as that for declicking these. Anybody can do it. So they still give feedback to the camera as far as the settings, but there is no autofocus on the Loxia at all. How come the Loxias breathe so much? Design limitation because of their compact size? Definitely. And again, the Loxias are a photo lens. Photography lenses don't take breathing into consideration. It's just not a concern. I think there was only one Tuit focal length for X mount. No, they were all the Tuit lenses came in X mount. I don't even remember. I think we stopped listing those on our site. Yeah, they're not even on our website anymore. Let's see what comes up here. Yeah, APS-C for Sony and Fujifilm. Oh, I guess they never made any more. So it's a 12 mil, a 32 mil, and a 50 mil. And again, they were kind of slow. The 12 was a 2.8. The 32 was a 1.8, which is okay. And then the 50 was a 2.8. I never used the 50. I never owned the 50 because it was kind of slow. I had much faster 50s for my Fuji system. I did use the 32mm for a long time on my X Pro 1, and I loved it, but I found other stuff that replaced it over time. And then the 12mm, I had that one as well. I took it to New York, got some awesome images of the Oculus, but I think I ended up selling that one, and I don't remember. I either sold it or I need to find it and dust it off and try it again, because I still shoot Fuji. If I'm not shooting on my Sigma FP, which is full frame, I'm usually shooting either film or on my X Pro 2. But my X Pro 2 almost always has a Midicon 35 on it. The CP.2 15 literally knocked me to the floor when we got our first one. Oh, okay. Was it that heavy? No, the 15 is a fantastic lens. There is no, like I said before, that was a ZF2, then it became a CP2, then it became the Milvis, and the CP3. That's a really, really good lens. I did not need to update anything in that lens. Do you think the vintage lens mania for contacts like R will fade now that we have affordable cine lenses like TZO make it? No. I think people will continue to want proper vintage lenses. And they're only going to become more expensive because it's supply and demand. I think that's like saying, you know, the Ford Mustang and the Chevy Camaro do their vintage inspired designs. They look like the old ones. So obviously the prices of the vintage ones will go down. But that's not the case. People wrap them around trees and they're just going to become more and more expensive and more valuable as time goes on. I think it's the same with vintage lenses. They're going to get used more now that they're in high demand. People are putting them on set, they're renting them out, they're getting used by people much more than, you know, your average photographer that was collecting them over the course of their career. And they're going to get dropped on set, they're going to get abused, they're going to get destroyed with really high torque motors. It's going to keep the supply low and the demand high, which is a recipe for a really expensive lens. So there's Loxia and Batis. They're both only available in E-mount, so if you're shooting an E-mount, these are a fantastic option. I think it was Loxia got some showtime or some love on Top Gun in their cockpit camera because it's so small. They used the oh man, what's that? The Venice, is it the Rialto? What's that like front portion of the Venice thing called? I can't remember. But they used it on some of the cockpit stuff, I think, along with a bunch of Voigtlander lenses, which are also fantastic. Which, fun fact, all of these modern photo versions, so Loxia, Milvis, Otus, ZF2, ZE, those were all made for Zeiss in Japan by Cosina, and Cosina owns the Voigtlander brand. So same factory, which is not a bad thing at all. It's a fantastic operation. They make some really cool lenses. And they're very good at what they do. Okay, so that jumps to Zeiss piggybacking on the success of the CP2s. They came out with the CP3s, which are everything that I think the CP2s should have been. I never liked the 114 diameter of the CP2s. They were kind of big for what they were, but I get it. It was Zeiss, you know, that was their foray into cine lenses. Like I said, prior to that, it was all airy products that Zeiss built, or designed and built. So the CP3, like I was saying, there's two versions. There's the CP3, and then there's the CP.3 XD. Which, quick side story on those, when they were announced, I did a blog post. They were announced at NAB, and I had drafted the blog post the night before and just said, okay, go live at 12:01 or whatever. It's just so that it didn't break the embargo. So the post went live in the middle of the night at an AB. Like I drafted it from my hotel room and everything. And I woke up the next day and there were a bunch of comments on my post because the blog platform that I used took every instance of the term XD and automatically turned it into an emoji, which is like the laughing, you know, the crossed eyes with the smiley. I felt so bad because the entire article was saying, you know, Zeiss CP.3, ha ha ha, and it just looked bad, looked so bad. So I had to go back and change all of that and figure it out. So yeah, that's that little laughing face right there. It's upside down, if you can picture it. Anyway, the XD stands for Zeiss Extended Data. Oh, there it is right there. Extended Data. And that's really their implementing the Hook/Eye protocol into the lenses, but in the newer version. So the /I 3, the latest version. So extended data takes all the other stuff like the focal length, the focus distance, the aperture setting. It takes all that stuff, the serial number, and then adds columns. So you have really, really useful stuff, the shading and distortion mapping that VFX or, I mean, the applications are limitless. You can use that data to correct for flaws in the design, or vice versa. You could use it if you're shooting with, say, I don't know, so you have something like you're cutting these with Supremes, and the Supremes look a little bit better, a little bit cleaner, but you want everything to be a little less clean, a little less clinical. You could say, all right, take the shading and the distortion from this 21mm CP3 and apply it to this Supreme Prime, and then you have a consistent look across your image. So it is really cool that they included that, and I applaud Zeiss for sort of pioneering the newer metadata. They really have pushed that forward for the better. So yeah, CP3s are basically the newer, smaller, lighter version of the CP2s. They do still inherit their glass from the photo lenses, so they're not going to perform better than the Milvis. The benefit optically is the iris. So the CP3s, is a terrible example because you can't really see it. But the Milvis, whereas they have maybe a 8 or 9 bladed aperture, the CP3s have this really nice circular aperture, which is going to give you better bokeh, much cleaner, more circular bokeh compared to the Milvis. So there is definitely a benefit optically to the CP3 over the Milvis, albeit minor, but in terms of sharpness and image quality, they should be practically the same. Fantastic focus rotation. I mean, nobody can complain. That's 300, a little over 300 degrees. Every mark that you could want. CP3s really are a really, what's the best way to put it? They're sort of a staple. You know, they're not super expensive. They're nice and light and compact compared to other cinema lenses. Yeah, there's really, aside from the speed of them, there's really not a lot of downsides to the CP3s. In fact, that's probably the only downside I can think of, is that they're all T2.1 with the exception of this guy, which is a T2.9, I think. Yeah, 2.9. Which they even fixed, like I said, in the Milvis. So the CP.2 was a T3.6, but the 18 CP3 is a T2.1. So that's really nice. Do you think we'll see another Otus lens? I hope so, but I have no inside information on upcoming Otus lenses. If Phil's still here, maybe ask Phil. How come I never see Rocors or Olympus OM lenses in use over the Contax like this? It's a good question. I think it's just a matter of trends. People love the name Zeiss on set. They like saying that they have Zeiss. Like I was talking about earlier, there's some misinformation about the Zeiss Contax being the same lens as the Super Speed, so I think there's still a lot of people out there that think that they have the same look as the Super Speed, but they don't. I don't know. So there's been wide adoption of the XD system for VFX. Hard to find much info about it online, but not sure if people doing it just don't have time to post it. I would say it's in the process of being widely adopted. I would say it's not widely adopted yet, but especially with the introduction of the volume and what's the I just forgot what it's called. What is that? Stagecraft. Having that metadata, having that specific information really is going to make a difference. Instead of having to shoot plates and distortion charts and mapping, having that in the lens in real time is going to become much more important over the next 5 to 10 years because of how successful things like The Mandalorian have been. So it's definitely on its way to being widely adopted, but I would say it's not widely adopted yet. Good morning, man. Good morning, John. Oh, Phil, I've asked every 3 months since the 100mm has been released on it for a new Otus. I personally want an 18 or 21. 21 feels right. Like Matthew, I would like a 35 too. There you go. Well, like I said, for Zeiss to make a 21mm f1.4 would be, and have, stellar image quality, would be a challenge, to say the least. And if anyone is up to the challenge, I'd say Zeiss is. But that is a heck of a challenge. Oh, here's a good example. Okay, so another CP3. This one also has the XD. So the non-XD ones will just be missing this plug right here, and they won't have the circuit board inside, obviously. This, I think, is funny. So this is the 135. And to sort of back up what I was saying before, we're still kind of in, date order here. The ZF2 135, it was probably, I think it was the last ZF2 lens to be released. Probably in the late 2010s, or no, not even after that. It doesn't matter, but it was the last lens for them to make before they switched to the Milvis, I believe. And they kept the optical design because honestly, there was nothing to improve. The 135 ZF2 is phenomenal. It's the same optics as the Milvis. It's the same optics as the 135 CP.2, and it's the same optics in here. And this is a fantastic lens. This is beautiful. It could easily be considered an Otus as far as image quality goes. It is funny though, because they have, again, beautiful focus rotation, really well done, nice spacing, but then you get, 25, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200. Who is taping out 200 feet where they need to, set their focus distance? I would love to see a practical scenario where someone taped out or, lasered 200 feet, but whatever. Anyway, I'm glad they put the marks there. So yeah. As far as the mechanical design goes, I really like what they did with the CP3s and the Supremes, which are coming up next. They really sort of took the best of what they learned on the Ultra Primes and the Master Primes and then implemented it. So as far as serviceability goes, the CP3s are great. Do you foresee Zeiss releasing high-speed CP3s? No. High-speed CP3s are called Supremes. I'll get to that in a second, though. How much do you think the Otus 35 would be if they made it? Like $7,000? No. 35 would not be a challenge for them to make. 3514. It would still be up there. It'd probably be somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000. Maybe a dumb question, but if you had aperture blades, gives you much better, more pleasing bokeh. Why would any manufacturer limit the number of blades to say 7 or 9? Optical design limitations. No, it's not a design limitation. It's more than likely just a cost. If you have to use 3 or 4 or 5 less blades, it keeps the price down. I couldn't tell you why. I think that would be another question for an optical designer to say, hey, why did you design this lens with a octagonal or a hexagonal aperture shape and not circular? I don't know. Not sure if this has been addressed. In your opinion, are Milvis and Classics overall pretty interchangeable look-wise? I'm sure CA and flare resistance have been improved, but otherwise. It has kind of been covered. If you want to rewind a bit, I'll definitely go over that. But just to answer it real quick, they are definitely interchangeable depending on the focal length. So for example, the classic 50 and 35 and 85 are pretty not great compared to the Milvis lenses. But if you take some of the other classic lenses that sort of got pushed up the line to the Milvis line, then yeah, the optics didn't change. So they're definitely interchangeable. So things like the 21, the 15, the 135, the macros, those are the same optics. So they're definitely interchangeable. How do you recoat older Zeiss lenses? It's my understanding that the older coatings, they sometimes use ingredients that are now prohibited. Is that true? And how do you recreate the older coatings? That's partially true. Older lenses used materials that are prohibited for environmental reasons in the glass itself, not necessarily in the coating. When we recoat, say, something like a super speed element, we specify a broadband multi-layer coating, which loosely is the same thing that Zeiss would use in their stuff. It's not going to be the same formula because the coating formula is really the secret sauce of any lens manufacturer. But usually when we're recoating a lens, it's from, a coating scratch or maybe fungus that ate through the coatings or something like that. And in most cases, it's one surface. When you remove and reapply, or I'd say when you change the coating on one surface of maybe 10 or 15 elements, you're talking about 20 or 30 surfaces. So if you're changing one surface out of 30 surfaces, the difference is imperceivable. If we had a customer that said, hey, I want to strip and recoat every surface in this lens, then yes, that might make a difference. But changing quite literally 1/30th of that coating formula is not going to make a perceivable difference unless we are using a different type of coating. For example, if we used a single layer, maybe a magnesium fluoride coating instead of a broadband multi-layer coating, then yes, that can change the look. But I've almost never seen negative results of polishing and recoating a single surface in a lens with a similar type of coating. So there you go. I wish I had a non-XD version just to show you the difference, but I don't. The CP3s can't be upgraded to XD after the fact, so I usually, it sounds crummy, it sounds very salesy, but I usually tell people, even if you're not going to use it immediately, just get the XD because it's going to be relevant at some point and you can't add it later. You might as well. So, especially for resale. Like I said, with all the stagecraft stuff and the XD becoming more and more accepted and utilized, it's going to become more important later on. So I usually tell people, if you really are trying to stick within a budget, skip the XD, but try to get it if you can. It's probably you'll probably thank yourself later. I love the shield-shaped aperture that's in the standard speed. Fit into speed boosters. That's not really possible. That would not work in the optical path. You have to use that point of convergence inside the lens. It's a very specific spot in a lens that the aperture has to be located. You can't tinker with that unless you want to get a specific look. Okay, so after the CP3s, we get to sort of the Hail Mary here. The Radiant, or the Supreme Primes. So somebody earlier was saying, oh, I wish I had CP3s, but faster. That's basically what the Supreme Primes are. Obviously, you get more with it. You get better image quality. You get better build quality. But you also similarly have a full frame cine lens, faster than the CP3s. So the CP3s for the most part are T2.1. The Supremes are all T1.5, except for maybe I think they're like super widest one, maybe. I don't even know if they had like a roadmap super early on when they first announced them. Okay, yeah, the 150 is a T1.8 and the 200 millimeter is a T2.2. But other than that, what is it? 18 all the way through 135 is T1.5. So these really, to me, are the modern day Ultra Prime or the modern day Super Speed. They are a no frills, super straightforward cine lens. They don't have any gimmicks. They do have XD, which is, I guess, some people could say, but it's there if you want it. There's no funkiness to them. They're just a good, solid cine lens. Any ideas why Arri and Zeiss split paths for the Supreme Prime signature? Yeah, because Zeiss came out with the CP.2s, which sort of... Arri has never made lenses, ever. They've always relied on other manufacturers. Arri is a fantastic camera manufacturer, but they've always tapped other brands, other lens companies, to make lenses for their camera. And they had a really good partnership with Zeiss for a long time, but I think Zeiss decided one day that they could make their own cine lenses and not have to, not have to sacrifice some of that reputation or maybe even some of that money. I don't know the details of the finances to Arri. And they were absolutely right. Why only make lenses for Arri? Why not make your own? So I think Zeiss saw the opportunity with the CP2s and they did really well. They saw the opportunity with the CP3s and did really well. And everybody loved the CP2s and CP3s and said, hey, can we get a faster, more cine-based lens instead of a repurposed photo lens? And I'm sure that Zeiss said, yeah, of course we could do that. And I think that was that created that rift between Arri and Zeiss, and Arri decided to go with a different manufacturer for the signature primes. Personally, I think that split is great. It gives more options to more cinematographers. They're both good lenses. There's nothing wrong with the Supremes or the signature primes. In fact, the signature primes are a fantastic image quality. There's really nothing bad to say about them other than, it's not even bad, but a limitation of the signature primes is you can only use them on LPL mount cameras, whereas the Supreme primes, you can do PL or EF or LPL or whatever you want, or E-mount, whatever. They can be adapted to pretty much anything. So the Supreme primes are just a little bit more versatile. And it says nitpicky and it's personal, but I will always prefer an anodized aluminum body over a painted body. And the Supreme or the signature primes use a painted body. But again, that's just my personal preference. Okay, so quick questions. How heavy are the Supreme primes and which lens is the heaviest? The Supremes are going to be the heaviest of these lenses here, definitely. Let's break out the scale. Actually, I'll break out the scale and tidy some of these up in a minute. I'm getting nervous having this many elements exposed. It's against my nature. And camera tech companies, I thought that Arris are built from Dalsa Camera Tech. Huh? I'm not sure what you're asking there. Arris. Dalsa never made lenses. Dalsa rehoused like ours, but they were not a lens manufacturer. The Dalsa primes were rehoused like a R series. Arri and Zeiss relationship reminds me of the old Leica Minolta partnership, basically exchanging body science for lens. Yeah, exactly. It's very similar. Leica partnered with tons of people over the years, and similarly, similar to Zeiss, Leica had a lot of their product lines that they farmed out to Japanese manufacturers. Leica did the same thing. A lot of the Leica lenses they partnered up with Panasonic, who manufactured a lot of lenses for Leica. Well, and it's not just Panasonic. I don't want to say Panasonic did all of them, but Zeiss is not the only German manufacturer to outsource their manufacturing for some of their lower end products. Oops. They also rehouse glass, but they did and do make sensors. Arri sensors are made by a different company. Oh, you're talking about the camera. Dalsa cameras plus Zeiss lenses equals Arri for a time. Okay. I am not a camera expert. I have no idea where Arri gets their sensors. I'm sure there's a lot of rumors. Alright, so Supreme primes, they're just a solid go-to Cine prime lens. There's nothing negative to say about them. So, fantastic lenses. The only thing that some people might have, disliked was how clean and accurate they are. Typical to Zeiss, they're designed very, very well, and they did their best to get rid of aberrations and focus breathing and distortion. So they're a very clean lens, and some people, especially some of you guys have mentioned already, were leaning towards the whole vintage fad, which was why Zeiss came out with the Radiance. I believe this is the last one in our exploration today. So the Radiance lenses, the Zeiss Supreme Radiance, does it say? It does. Zeiss Supreme Radiance. They have the blue. You can barely see it. It's not a great color choice, but it says blue. I can't even catch it in the light. Right after the T-Star. So it's a Zeiss T-Star blue coating. And then they have this gold ring at the back instead of black, like the normal Supreme primes. That's really the only way to tell the difference on the outside. What Zeiss did with the Radiance lenses was pretty clever. So again, if you haven't heard of Benjamin Volker, just Google him. He's sort of the mad scientist behind the coating technology that made the Radiance what they are. So he's an absolute genius. When I say ask a PhD about optical stuff, he's the kind of person I'm talking about. He is a proper optical engineer, PhD. And he spent all his time at Zeiss getting rid of flares, getting rid of aberrations, getting rid of anything they can with sophisticated coatings, anti-reflective coatings. So Zeiss basically said, all right, Benjamin, take a step back. Can you put flaws into the lens intentionally, controlled? And he said, sure. So that's where the Radiance came in. They, instead of removing as many aberrations as possible, they sort of picked a look that cinematographers liked as far as flares and halation and contrast goes. And they said, okay, now can we keep that look consistent across the entire Supreme Prime line? And they did just that. But instead of applying it to the regular lenses, they made them the Zeiss Radiance lenses. So optically and mechanically, there's really no difference whatsoever. The difference is in the coatings, which give them a unique, we'll say character-rich look. They have better flare. They have a really pronounced flare, a nice blue flare, slightly lower contrast, and it's really well controlled. It doesn't just disappear when you stop down the aperture. It's literally tailored into the lens. It's a very intentional design. I personally really enjoy it. As I've said many times on the stream, most of my still photography, I'm definitely a hobbyist. I don't consider myself a photographer or a cinematographer, but I shoot mostly on my Fuji X Pro 2 and the Sigma FP, and both of those cameras, on the X Pro 2, it's a piece of junk Midicon. It's like the very first iteration. Oh no, sorry, it's one of the first models of the second version of the 35mm 0.95, and it's not a good lens. It's mechanically or optically, but I love the images that it produces. I enjoy some flare. I enjoy some lower contrast. I enjoy a little bit of distortion, and I think that's why I'm drawn a lot to the Radiance, because they have those characteristics built in intentionally, not because it was poorly designed, but they specifically said, okay, here's that look that cinematographers want, and they did it really well. I think probably the most important factor is that it's consistent across the entire range of Supreme primes, the Supreme Prime Radiance. It's not, obviously it depends on your focal length, because say you're on a 21 compared to a 100, it's not going to be the same scene. You have completely different field of view, and whereas with the 100 you'd have maybe one key light in the frame, but then you go to like a 21 and you have an entire city with all these different light sources. It varies, obviously, but as far as that look goes, it's going to be more consistent across the entire range of Radiance lenses than it would be from me grabbing 2 or 3 different poorly designed lenses. And I'm trying not to bash the Midicon, because it is a really fun lens and I really like it. It's just not, it's the opposite of what this is. You can have a lens where these features are there because it's supposed to be a cheaper lens, it just wasn't designed or manufactured as well. Or you can have it where they designed it to the nth degree and it's intentional. And to me, that's what the Radiance are. So yeah, I think I answered all the questions just by rambling this long. It's also rehoused glass. Oh, I did that one. Free Alexa. Which other lenses have the 3D pop that they say Zeiss has? The 3D pop is very subjective. I strongly disagree with that term. I really need someone to define 3D pop to me, because I've seen a lot of lenses that have really good depth to them, and I just don't like that term 3D pop. I don't know. What one person considers 3D pop is completely different from another person, so I'm not entirely sure how to answer that. Quick lenses have that pop, do they? That's also very, very vague and misleading, because the image quality from, say, a Cooke Speed Panchro and a Cooke S7 are so different. It's impossible to say that all Cooke lenses have one look across them, despite them using the whole Cooke look thing. But that's mostly marketing. Talking about the Sigma FP, would Zeiss make L-mount lenses, or is the Leica Sigma alliance not likely to allow that? I don't know. The L-mount alliance is Leica, Sigma, and Panasonic. I don't think it's an exclusive club. I'm sure they'd let other people in, but I think that Zeiss is very comfortably in bed with Sony. I don't think that they see any benefit to producing L-mount lenses compared to the numbers they get with Sony E-mount lenses. Sadly, it comes down to numbers, especially with these Japanese companies. Japanese and German. If someone from Zeiss says, hey, how many, we should make L-mount lenses, and then they say, okay, well, how many can we anticipate making? And they say, well, maybe a fraction of the E-mount lenses. Then they do the numbers and they say, no, that's not going to be profitable. So I don't anticipate them making L-mount lenses anytime soon. But I would be the first person in line if they did, because I love that FP. I'm waiting on my FPL any day now. Acutance to an edge focus roll off to smooth micro contrast equals smooth pop, mainly mainly can be tweaked via exploring air gaps in different designs. What? Focus roll off to smooth micro contrast. So you're talking about the, if I understand, Phil, you're talking about more or less the amount of focus roll off behind or in front of your actual focused subject. Is that correct? The Contax Planar 85 1.2 50/60 anniversary lenses, were they based on another existing Zeus? I'm going to assume you mean Zeiss because my autocorrect does that to Zeiss all the time. Lens on their own construction entirely. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think I was born when those were designed. Maybe I was. 50th anniversary. Maybe for the 60th anniversary ones. Yeah, my phone always corrects Zeiss to Zeus, and then what's the other one? Oh, it always corrects Midicon to mistaken. And people laugh at that all the time, and it's like, hey, I got my mistaken lens, it looks great, something like that. I'm opening up quite a few lenses during lockdown to pass time, and I always wondered, how do you avoid dust on your workspace bench? Any tips? Several things. One, our building is heavily filtered. There's a bunch of preventative measures that we have in our service area. I've gone over this a little bit in previous mod streams. This particular office is not where I would normally work on lenses. But again, because of COVID, we had to sort of space our technicians apart. The actual space that I would normally work on lenses is on the other side of the wall behind me. And all the technicians, the dust thing, all the technicians use very clean air that is, again, filtered heavily over and over. And then for important stuff, we use when I say important, I mean like a very large surface. Like if we're servicing a 24-290 Optimo, there's a couple elements in that lens that are highly magnified once you put it together. And they're just a huge surface. So we use a laminar flow bench, and we use ionized air. And then another trick, it's counterintuitive because everyone always says moisture is the enemy for lenses, but a lot of the time, part of the reason you get so much lint on lenses is from static electricity. So we maintain a very specific moisture level. It's not high by any means. We're still in California. It's the desert. But having zero moisture in the air actually increases static electricity. So we control that very carefully. There's a lot of little things that, I mean, I could spend all day going into all the preventative things, you know, bunny suits and the sticky mats, and there's so many little things. I think probably the easiest thing I could recommend for people doing stuff at home is patience. If you're putting a lens back together and you're 10 elements done and you notice a piece of lint at the bottom, do it again. Pull the glass out, start over, have patience. And don't get frustrated and give up and just leave it there. Yeah, it's very complex. That's our entire business. So that's all we've done for, oh my gosh, next year will be, 2022 will be our 20th anniversary. But that's just for Duclos lenses as a business. My father and some of our senior technicians, they've been lens technicians for 30-40 years. So, most of us have been doing this practically our entire life. Yeah, it is making me nervous, Phil. I need to cover all of these. It's some of them not so much, but like this Super Speed 18 with the glass sticking out, you can't get those elements anymore. So that makes me very nervous. pretty much everything else here we can easily get, or we even have in stock. But yeah, that one I'm nervous about. Super speed glass is very hard to find. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The only thing I'm bummed that I'm missing is a Master Prime and a B speed. I'm sure I could have looked for a B speed. There's probably one in for service right now. We see those all the time. What are your thoughts on using the newer Canon 0.71 focal reducer on the Komodo, for example, to achieve full frame look? I think it's fine. Truth be told, so right now, most of what I'm doing on the FP, it's either Sigma's new I series lenses, or I've been using a Mamiya with a focal reducer, the Kip-on focal reducer. So I really enjoy it. I would just warn anyone that's considering using a focal reducer to know what you're getting into. Metabones did a really good job early on of telling people that it makes your lenses sharper and faster, and that's just not true. You're going to sacrifice some image quality when you use a speed booster, period. There's no question about it. But in the case of the Mamiyas, they have character, and I don't mind sacrificing some of that image quality because that's sort of the look I'm going for. So, just know that. Master and oh yeah, I didn't do Master Anamorphics either. But again, both of those are really an airy product. I included the Super Speeds and the Ultra Prime, which if you ask someone from Airy, they'll be like, ah, yes, that's an Airy product that Zeiss made for us. They're very, very bitter about that whole thing. No, it's not a Zeiss. It's an Airy manufactured by Zeiss. Oh, thank you, Johnny. My pleasure. Zeiss Zoom. Oh, I didn't cover any zooms. This was supposed to be just primes today, Phil. Sorry. Master Zoom 16.5 to 110. Groundbreaking as well as backbreaking. Yeah, that is until the 24 to 290 Optimo came out, that was one of the heaviest lenses you could get. That thing is a beast. It's a good lens though. It's just compared to stuff today, it's hard to justify such a big, heavy Super 35 lens. But it is a fantastic zoom range, really good image quality. Any other questions I missed from the groups? Somebody was asking about. Oh, I already answered this one. The Zeiss, the 645 stuff. I think that's about it. All right. Yeah, maybe we'll do another one of these specifically for Zeiss zooms. That might be kind of cool. Zeiss zooms would be nice because there's a lot of vintage stuff like the 10 to 100. Actually, now I'm spacing. That's pretty much the only vintage one. Technically, you have the Zeiss VP1, 2, and 3, the variable primes, but I think Zeiss would rather not I think Zeiss would rather people not remember those. Speaking of big, heavy lenses. You have an example of the Otus CINE-MOD Pro there. A huge shout out to that modification, making use of Otus. Nice. I did show, I didn't go into it too much. This isn't the Pro, this is what we used to call the CINE-MOD Otus, but the naming got really confusing. But this is basically the same thing as the CINE-MOD Pro. The focus scale, so normally this just has a rubber grip, kind of like the Milvis did. And people wanted to use them, people like Phil wanted to use them specifically for cinematography. So what we ended up doing, we engraved a new witness mark in the operator position. So when this lens is on the camera, it's hard to show you. I'm showing the front facing camera. But it's in the operator position, the mark is on the side. But in normal use, the witness mark is on top, because when you're shooting photography, that's the best place to look. You've got your camera there and you look at your scale on top of the lens. Nobody wants to do this every time they're looking at their still lens. So we moved it there, and we made a newer, larger focus scale. The other downside was you had this tiny little window. So if you're a focus puller and you were trying to nail, 5 feet right there, you wouldn't be able to see it coming until it's practically upon you. So you have this tiny little viewing window. Whereas here, you could see it coming a mile away because the whole focus scale is exposed. It's fully external. So it still all lines up, when you add... Oh, and then the other downside was the number of marks. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then these are practically used. So like 8 usable marks. And then with the revised scale, you've got like 20 focus marks. So it's just a little extra modification that we do for the Otus that makes them more cinema friendly. And they all still line up. So there's 25 feet on that scale, 25 feet on this scale. So you could still use whichever one you want. It doesn't, there's no downside to it. So yeah, and then the front ring, we're really proud of these. They're tailored to the lens, so it really sort of continues that nice design that Zeiss did. Yeah. Snug. But it's just threaded on. Another shout out, I think this was another Alex Nelson design. I think he and I were both really proud of that one. Because it just fits so nicely onto the lens. It wasn't our normal... It wasn't like a standard straight step-up ring. It looked nice. So yeah. Okay. Please do a zoom review for Super 35 and full frame. Oof. There's a lot of zooms out there now. I will definitely have to separate Super 35 and full frame. Everybody wants side scales. Well, then tell Zeiss that. Keep poking Zeiss. Alright. I'm going to call it there. I think we covered almost everything Zeiss has to offer, with the exception of the Tuit, which would be right in here. A Master Prime, which would be right here. And like a B-Speed, which would be off camera up here on the left. So, okay. I'll probably, now that I'm back from vacation, I'll probably be back next weekend. So, thank you all, and I will see you then.